An ethics complaint filed with the Georgia Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Commission late Tuesday alleges that David Simons, a candidate for board president of Savannah-Chatham County Public Schools, continued to act as a local government lobbyist to the school district as recently as 3 weeks ago and years after he stopped registering with the state as a lobbyist. As its principal evidence, the complaint cites emails obtained through an open records request with Savannah-Chatham Public Schools, emails I authenticated with a school district spokesman. On April 16th, Simons writes to School Superintendent Thomas Lockamy, quote, "Per our discussion today, these are potential dates when Reeves Worrell would like to sit down for coffee with you," unquote. Reeves Worrell is a Savannah construction company and subsidiary of J.E. Dunn Construction, who Simons admitted in a phone conversation with WSAV as a client of his political consulting firm. In another email the next day to Lockamy and the 5 Caucasian members of the school board, Simons writes about the district's commitment to directing construction contracts to minority and woman-owned business enterprises in the selection of a contractor for a new Otis Brock Elementary School. Quote, "This needs to end sooner than later, where these unscrupulous minority contractors hold the school board and the legitimate contractors over a barrel," unquote. The ethics complaint also includes screen captures from Simons' political consulting firm's website, which bills itself as, quote, "a group of proactive, creative government affairs businesses," unquote. On Simons' website bio, he touts his experience as a corporate lobbyist. The complaint cites another website section which promises services that can, quote, "defend against onerous legislation, secure appropriations, or expand a business into uncharted waters," unquote. All activities characterized by lobbying. But according to the complaint and the Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Commission website, Simons has not registered as a lobbyist since 2011. The Georgia Code defines lobbyist as, quote, "any natural person who, for compensation, is hired specifically to undertake influencing a public officer or state agency in the selection of a vendor to supply any goods or services to any state agency," unquote. Which is the crux of the complaint, which alleges, quote, "Mr. Simons was acting as a lobbyist for the interest of another in approaching these officials," unquote.
Live, on air, and online, this is WSAV News 3 at 6.
He's made it clear he thinks there is no such thing as a free lunch. But now we look into who's footing the bill for Congressman Jack Kingston's lunch. Good evening. It is Thursday, January 9th. I'm Tina Tyus-Shaw.
And I'm Russ Riesinger. Thanks for joining us. Our top story at 6 News 3 is digging deeper after some controversial comments by Congressman Jack Kingston about free lunch.
It is part of another good government project. Here is News 3's Dave Kartunen.
It was a comment that raised eyebrows nationwide.
Why don't you have the kids pay a dime, pay a nickel, to instill in them that there is, in fact, no such thing as a free lunch, or maybe sweep the floor in the cafeteria.
And led to an immediate clarification.
I did not specify clearly that this was not an indictment on anybody in a particular socioeconomic group. This would be good for all children.
But while Savannah Congressman Jack Kingston has tried to move on, the dust-up got News 3 investigating. Thousands of pages of disclosures, expense reports, and federal disbursements to try to estimate just how many so-called free lunches a congressman like Jack Kingston and his staff might receive. We took the past 3 years. First, in official business, Kingston and his staff expensed nearly $4,200 in meals for business purposes to his congressional office, paid for by the American taxpayer. The numbers and sources of the meals get cloudy from there. Since 2011, Kingston has taken official trips to 4 continents as a member of the House Appropriations Committee. The trips entitle him to a generous per diem allowance, depending on the locale, sometimes hundreds of dollars a day. The total in per diems in the past 3 years on all these trips, more than $24,000. Free lunches? Perhaps not, but again, paid for by the American taxpayer.
I've always worked a 60 or 70-hour work week.
Kingston defended his own work ethic when we asked him if he thinks Congress and its members work hard. The House was in session for just 159 days last year.
I'm a believer that sometimes Congress not being in session, it's not a bad thing in itself.
And then there are the meals from third-party interest groups on trips we told you about last year to places like Israel, Turkey, and Costa Rica. Nearly $4,300 just in meals on this tab since 2011. The trips are billed as educational, but when a political interest group is picking up the check, it led us to ask Kingston if it's fair to ask who Congress is working hard for. He said voters can answer that question at the ballot box.
That's what representative democracy is about, is members going to Washington but coming home and answering the tough questions.
And finally, the big number. Kingston is now engaged in a statewide campaign for the U.S. Senate. Candidates raise millions of dollars, largely through fundraisers stocked with food and beverage. In the past 3 years, the Kingston campaign operation has reported at least $145,000 in expensed meals and catering for campaign events. $26,000 of that was expensed in meals at the exclusive, members-only Capitol Hill Republican Club in Washington. Now, it is political contributors who pay for this food and beverage tab in donations to campaigns of all political stripes. In fact, the Supreme Court has already ruled in Citizens United that this is free speech. But Kingston says the discussion is about work ethic, so it again raises the question of who Congress really works hard to serve. In fact, we spoke to Kingston at a campaign stop at Bullock County Country Club with, that's right, isn't this a free lunch?
This is what we need in America. We need workfare over welfare. I learned a lot when I was 14 and 15 years old doing chores inside and outside the household. And as a result, I grew up with a good work ethic. It's hard in today's society to have a discussion where you want to challenge the status quo because of the I got you politics.
As early as 2009, a full 2 years before they would ask Chatham County for a $183 million bond issue, Memorial Hospital appeared to have a problem. The details come from a civil complaint joined by the federal government earlier this month. November 2009, Memorial's board calls a meeting of their Personnel and Compensation Committee to discuss their alleged overpayment of doctors. Board member Michael Kegler asks how, quote, losing $1 million a month on physician practices would affect the hospital. The following year, May 2010, Kegler helps the hospital devise a new payment plan, which physicians reject. Committee minutes, also in the Fed's complaint, recognize the hospital is overpaying doctors. Kegler, quote, wants to see the worst case scenarios of revenues if doctors leave the hospital and the hospital loses referrals. That these are the actions of a Memorial Hospital board member are not surprising. But Michael Kegler was and still is Chatham County's assistant county manager.
I think there's a stunning lack of transparency in what I consider to be good government. There are lots of people with pieces of information who should have passed it on and didn't.
And yet, by December 2011, just weeks after Memorial asked Chatham County to help it refinance its debt by underwriting that $183 million bond issue, Kegler opts to step aside from the hospital, that is, telling the county attorney in a memo, quote, in order to be fair to the county as well as Memorial and not give the appearance of any conflict, unquote. And yet, when we requested Chatham County could turn up no correspondence or work product informing county commissioners of the potential civil penalties the hospital could face for alleged Medicare fraud. When I contacted Assistant County Manager Kegler to ask him about these apparent conflicts, he told me I had my timeline wrong. When I asked him about his actions on the Memorial Board, he referred me to the hospital's attorneys, even though he works for the county and no longer serves on the Memorial Board. Left unclear, we confronted Kegler in the hallway outside Commission chambers, where he immediately removed himself behind the door of his office.
I didn't find any communication about what you found while serving on the Memorial Board to your superior, Mr. Abel, to any of the commissioners. I mean, did you convey any of that information?
I discussed it with Mr. Abel, so that's
How? How did you discuss it with him?
we talked about it.
In fact, new county manager Lee Smith confirmed to News 3 last week he couldn't find any correspondence from anyone about the potential exposure to civil penalties for alleged Medicare fraud. And Finance Director Linda Kramer told News 3 directly that when Memorial told her of the investigation, quote, no civil penalties were discussed, unquote.
All of these issues should have been raised and passed on to the county commission so that they could have made a fully informed decision.
But in March of 2012, 2.5 years after the feds say Kegler started helping Memorial change its compensation to doctors, the Chatham County Commission unanimously approved the $183 million bond issue for the hospital. According to the complaint, Memorial now faces up to $80 to $130 million in civil penalties if they're found liable in federal court. And if federal penalties send Memorial into default on the bond, Chatham County taxpayers would be on the hook for the balance, $167 million still outstanding, or some $17 million a year for more than a decade. I'm Dave Kartunen, WSAV News 3.